tonight to welcome Stephen Kurczy to Savoy to discuss The Quiet Zone. Stephen Kurczy is an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Christian Science Monitor, among other outlets. He graduated from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, where he was a 2016-2017 Knight Baggot Fellow in Business and Economics Journalism. He has lived without a cell phone for over a decade. Book list called The Quiet Zone, an engaging and sympathetic study of the myriad people who call this unique place home. Stephen will talk for a little bit, he'll answer some questions, and then we'll do signing of the books afterwards. And now please welcome Stephen Kurczy.
So thanks everybody for coming. Like that. I smile whenever I hear that Stephen Kurczy is an award-winning journalist. Hello, whoever's watching out there. And because my very first award as a journalist, one that I'm most proud of still, was doing this 4-part series on housing in the Stonington area, like affordable housing and how people are being priced out. And my editor on that was none other than Steve Fagan, who's sitting right here. Aww. This is like a nice, like, coming full circle of like being able to talk to you about the book that we're working on.
I knew this day would come.
I certainly did. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks for making the trip over here. I think I know everybody here except for you two back there. So who are you two? What are your names?
I'm Sharon Oliver Kelly with my husband Michael Kelly.
Okay. Nice to meet you both.
Sound and interesting.
Well, thanks for coming.
I didn't know we had to know everyone.
No. I was just, I'm patting the audience, my buddy, all my friends and family. Otherwise, it would have just been me and you. So there was supposed to be a stream here today, so prepared this slideshow. No.
I forgot it at the other store.
But I still have like this laptop, so hopefully like, this will make do, and I can kind of like show it to you or not. So I kind of wanted to start off by showing you these this like trailer that I prepared with my publicist. This is something we prepared before the book actually came out, and this is what you would hear if you go to the Greenbank Observatory and take one of their tours of all the telescopes and what's going on there. We'll see if the audio is good enough and if the internet is fast enough. Unable to play video error, so we'll skip that. Essentially, this is a video of when you go to the observatory and you take a tour of the telescopes, you get into this like van. You all kind of look in this van, you're driving all around the telescopes, and somebody says to you, at this point, you have to turn off all your devices. It can't just be on airplane mode, it can't just be on silent mode, it just has to be totally off. Because even if it's on airplane mode, that device is still going to be picked up by these ultra-sensitive telescopes that they have out there at the Greenbank Observatory. As an example of how sensitive they are, the most sensitive telescope there, the Greenbank telescope, which is on the cover of the book, it could pick up a cell phone on airplane mode if it was on Mars. That's the amount of signal it can pick up, that very faint energy. It can still pick up like that faint amount of signal. Such like it'd be really quiet while you're there. So the Quiet Zone, what is it? Here's a map of the National Radio Quiet Zone. Can you all see it to some extent? So you can see the shaded area, that's West Virginia. And the Quiet Zone is this rectangular area. It's West Virginia, it's Virginia, it's a little piece of Maryland at the top tip. It's 13,000 square miles. And for context, that's the size of Connecticut and Massachusetts combined. That's 13,000 square miles. And it's all for the sake of, on the surface of it, the Greenbank Observatory, which was founded back in 1956. It's since had a number of telescopes erected there over the past half century. Today, the most notable telescope is that one on the book cover, the Greenbank telescope, and that's where that dot is there. What makes it a quiet zone? So the Quiet Zone was established in 1958. What makes it a quiet zone is that any kind of fixed installation for a communication system, TV, radio, two-way radio, cell phones, anything, it has to be approved first by the Quiet Zone administrator, who is based there in Greenbank. Feel free to just pop in with questions at any time. And if this is sounding kind of too redundant, if you've already read the book, you know that too. How you doing out there in the audience? Feel free to like, talk at me or something. I guess you could call Savoy Bookshop and they'll pass it on to me.
Oh my God, yeah.
So that's a picture of the Greenbank telescope. And if you look closely, you can see me and Jenna's dog orbit at the very bottom. Do you see this down there?
Oh,
Yeah. So the Greenbank telescope, it's nearly 500 feet tall. It's the largest fully steerable telescope in the world. 500 feet tall, that's really tall. You know, we drove by Fox Tower to get here. Fox Tower over at Foxwood Casino. That's only about 200 feet tall. This is more than twice the height of Fox Tower, and it makes it all the more marvelous when you're driving hours into remote Appalachia over mountain passes, these steep winding roads, and you turn this bend, and all of a sudden, there amid these forests and fields and pastures is this 500-foot tall monstrosity rising there out of the forest. It's gorgeous, and it boggles the mind. Like, how did this end up here? Is it some kind of alien spacecraft? And right away, it hits you that this is like a really unique place where there's cutting edge science, like rubbing elbows with a really pastoral, you know, rural culture of Appalachia. So I don't think this is going to work, unfortunately, these videos. Oh. So here's another like video we prepared for the launch of the book. What if there's a place where people are constantly scrolling? These are all pictures of Greenbank, where forest hikes were never tainted with a ringtone. We're getting lost, man. Really getting lost. These questions led me through rugged Appalachian backcountry and into the heart of the quiet zone. And that's the book cover. And, you know, that's kind of like what drew me there, and what draws lots of people to this place. It's this idea of like getting away from it all, going to a quiet place where we're free of like our buzzing phones, from like the onslaught of all this, you know, technological noise that's around us all the time. It's what's drawn so many media there over the past, you know, decade, especially. You know, popular media portrayals of the quiet zone. You see a lot of headlines like this: "Enter the quiet zone, where cell service, Wi-Fi are banned." That's from NPR in 2013. "Life in the quiet zone, West Virginia town avoids electronics for science." That's National Geographic. I think that was 2015. New York Times. "No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, no problem. Growing up inside America's quiet zone." And that's from 2020. That's pretty recently. So like, as all these headlines would have you believe, this is a place where there's no Wi-Fi, where there's no cell service, where smartphones are outlawed. And that's what I went there, you know, expecting to find. Like I mentioned before, I don't own a smartphone. I haven't had one since 2009. And it's, you know, it's kind of like started off as like a decision to save some money, and it turned into this philosophical aversion to a way of life where we're constantly being connected for the sake of other people. You know, where we constantly have to like be looking at our phones and like constantly checking it because somebody might get in touch with us. I really kind of rejected that. And Greenbank and the quiet zone was this place that were kind of like where my philosophical aversion to this way of always being connected would meet reality. It seemed like here's a place where I would find my people. And my people, like, let's have a show of hands. Who here doesn't have a cell phone? One person here doesn't own a cell phone. So you're my people, right? You belong in the quiet zone. We can have a quiet zone together. So it's just so difficult to find anybody who shares that kind of way of life, especially, you know, employers who might want to share that way of life. So it's like maybe going out to Greenbank was a place where I would find my people. What's the popular appeal of the quiet zone? Like I just kind of suggested it. If you've been watching, reading the news lately, you've been following the whole Facebook files leaks about how Facebook, Instagram is knowingly toxic. Like Instagram knows that it causes teenage depression, teenage, you know, thoughts of suicide, anorexia. Facebook, that's like 1 in 8 users, according to Facebook. 1 in 8 users of Facebook is depressed because they're using Facebook. It's like 150 million people because there's so many people on Facebook and they know it. So like this really contributes to this idea of like, where can I go to get away from it all? There's been so much research. Here's a research headline that I quoted in the book, brain drain. sorry, that the Wall Street Journal's been saying through the recent Facebook files leaks, that a lot of this social media is toxic. And the connection to smartphones is that our smartphones, they're the conduit for a lot of these social media apps. You use them through your smartphone. If you don't have your smartphone, you're much less likely to be on them all the time or to be, addicted to them. Jen and I first visited together in March of 2017. We'd only been dating for really a couple of months. This is long before kids or anything like that. And this is essentially what we saw. This is an excerpt from the audiobook.
You can see a handful of radio telescopes poking above the trees. The largest, a 485-foot-tall tangle of white beams holding a giant dish the size of 2 football fields. It looked like a wash basin for Godzilla. The telescope sat at the bottom of a 4-mile-long valley surrounded by mountains up to 4,800 feet tall, which created a natural barrier against the outside world's noise. Operating any electrical equipment within 10 miles of here was illegal if it caused interference to the telescopes. Surrounding that 10-mile radius, a 13,000 square mile national radio quiet zone, an area larger than the combined landmass of Connecticut and Massachusetts, further limited cell service and all kinds of wireless communication systems. Restrictions were based on a simple premise: to listen, we have to hear. To unlock the mysteries of the universe, we have to be quiet.
Those are all pictures from Greenbank and the surrounding county of Pocahontas to give you a sense of how quiet this area naturally is. Just to back up, why is the quiet zone based in Greenbank? It's because it was deemed to be one of the quietest places on the East Coast when they established the observatory there back in the 50s. It's surrounded by a ring of mountains up to nearly 5,000 feet tall that really blocks out the outside world's noise. It makes it hard to get into this area. Even today, there's only about 8,000 people in a county the size of Rhode Island. The entire county is the landmass size of Rhode Island. There's 8,000 people there. There's only one high school, only one newspaper. If you want to get away from it all, you go there. And that's why the observatory went there, because it's naturally quiet. And it's been protected. That quiet's been codified and protected because of this state law and that national radio quiet zone law.
See you ahead.
And I kept going back after that first visit with Jenna for 3 years. I mentioned before, I kind of alluded to this wonderful aspect of how cutting edge science and astronomy is rubbing elbows with this Appalachian culture. Lost my page here. Here's a clip I have from when Jenna and I were in Greenbank for Christmas, New Year's of 2018, 2019. It's a clip of a local band called Juanita Fireball and Continental Drifters. That person there, he's the principal scientist at the Greenbank Observatory. He essentially oversaw the building of the Greenbank telescope. It's like his baby. He was the assistant director or the site director of the Greenbank Observatory throughout the 90s. He's also a state champion banjo player and one of the best fiddlers around Pocahontas. So that's him playing fiddle. Next to him is a high school teacher who led the high school's forestry club to something like 20 national championships in a row. So you have the guy who led, who oversaw the building of and still is the principal scientist of one of the world's leading cutting edge radio telescopes, next to one of the premier forestry club leaders in the nation. Here's what their band sounds like. Appreciate that. Do you know the song? Yeah. Music is a really wonderful part of the culture there. And so a lot of times I was trying to join in on the music. I had some embarrassing moments with that. I think if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But oftentimes you'd have a party and just people would start playing music. Asterisk, the young woman who walked in the back, that's Jay Lockman's daughter. At the time she was a student at Oberlin, and she had applied to Oberlin with an essay titled How to Play Stand-Up Bass Like a Badass. She had learned how to play stand-up bass there in Pocahontas County. So what is quiet good for? Who is attracted to quiet? What do we need quiet for? Well, obviously, radio astronomy. This is one of the most famous radio astronomers who has been in Greenbank over the past, 60 decades, six decades that it's been in existence. His name is Frank Drake. He's considered somewhat of the godfather of the modern search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The world's very first official search for extraterrestrial intelligence was done there in Greenbank using one of those telescopes in 1960. On the board, he's written something called the Drake equation, and that's named after himself. It's Frank Drake. It's essentially an estimate of the probability that intelligent life exists out there in the universe. And according to, you can kind of fiddle with the variables based on like what you think are like, an inhabitable solar system or whatever else. But he estimates that there's something like 10,000 intelligent civilizations out there in the universe, which really makes it all the more important that we be looking for them, which is why to this day in Greenbank, they are looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. They're using that telescope to scan the heavens for signs of ET out there. If any of you have seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, it's essentially, that's what's going on out there. It's a wonderful irony, right? Like if ET is out there, the first town to know about it is going to be the quietest one in America. Little aside, so I mentioned before, like going to this place because it's quiet. This is like something that the Greenbank Observatory brands itself as. Like it markets itself for its quiet. This is a hat I got from the observatory's gift shop. It says NRQZ, established 1958. NRQZ is National Radio Quiet Zone, established 1958. Greenbank, America's quietest town, West Virginia. So it's selling this idea that this is a super quiet place where you can come to. I think it's. This is a map. This is a T-shirt I got there at the Greenbank Observatory. It's got that map of the quiet zone, and there it is, 13,000 square miles of quiet. And on the map, you see that star with the Greenbank Observatory is. Note where the star is on the map, and note how there's no other star on the map. It's just claiming that the quiet is for the sake of the observatory. Right. We'll come back to that. So we got Frank Drake, and really, Jay Lockman, he's the guy who's playing fiddle in that other screen. He's continuing that search for ET among many other more important things out there in the cosmos today in Greenbank, using the Greenbank telescope there in the background. Who else is attracted to quiet? Well, it turns out a famous hippie clown doctor named what? Patch Adams. That's Robin Williams, who portrayed the real life Patch Adams in that blockbuster movie up by Universal Studios where my aunt used to work. Patch Adams. So the real Patch Adams, at the end of that movie, you might remember, it ends with this line about how the real Patch Adams is building a free rural hospital to serve Appalachians in West Virginia. That's in the quiet zone, just south of the Greenbank Observatory. The real Patch Adams, he didn't know anything about radio astronomy or radio quiet when he went there, but he went there for the same reason as the radio astronomers, because it's a place where you have cheap land, not many people, where you could basically do your own thing, pursue your own quirky aims, and nobody's going to bother you. In the case of Patch Adams, that was having this silly, fun-themed hospitals. Hey, Chris.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. Chris Woodsize, here. This is Steve Fagan and Phil. Asterisk, I gotta say, so this Chris Woodside, she's the editor of Appalachia Journal, and many years ago, she and Steve and Phil, I don't know if anybody else here was on that trip, they did this thing where in 24 hours, they climbed the tallest peaks in all of New England in 24 hours, right?
40 hours.
Oh, 40 hours, sorry. Well, in that case, it's not worth mentioning. So Katahdin, Washington, Mansfield, what are the others? Bear Mountain?
No,
Mount-
the edge of Mount Purcell in Connecticut.
Okay.
And then Jeremont Hill.
Oh, in Rhode
Don't
Island.
forget that.
Yeah. And of course,
Greylock.
and Greylock, is missing Greylock,
Yeah.
all in 40 hours.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it turns out Patch Adams is also attracted to the quiet zone. And over the past 4 decades, he's been raising tens of millions of dollars to build this silly hospital. And he still has this incredible brand online. You see glowing articles about Patch Adams everywhere as being this beneficent clown doctor who's like building this rural healthcare hospital, which in reality, has never seen a single person in Pocahontas County. He's never treated a single person. And there's a lot of disillusion with the idea of patch homes there in Pocahontas County. Who else is attracted to the quiet? Well, neo-Nazis. This is a notorious neo-Nazi named William Pierce. He was the founder and longtime leader of the National Alliance, which was considered the country's preeminent, best organized, most influential neo-Nazi formation throughout the 1990s. He wrote a book called The Turner Diaries, which still has a nefarious influence to this day. It was a motivating text for Timothy McVeigh in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. McVeigh had that book in his getaway car. He had pages outlined. It was also seen as, there were allusions to the book at the insurrection on Capitol Hill earlier this year. There was a news directed outside the Capitol, and Donald Trump's own terrorism analyst said that's an allusion to the Turner Diaries, written by this guy, who retreated to the quiet zone just south of the Greenbank Observatory, because it's a place where he could get away from it all. He could get away from law enforcement, civil rights groups, minorities, everything that was badgering him back in the city. And a lot of the same reasons, really, that the astronomers went there. This is a picture you can see of David Pringle. He's a character in my book who I spent quite a bit of time with. He's the bearded guy. And he's standing next to a fairly notorious neo-Nazi figure named David Duke. He's right next to him, if you've all heard of David Duke. David Duke, who's probably one of the more infamous living neo-Nazi leaders today, he credited William Pierce as one of his major inspirations in a New York Times obituary about William Pierce when he died in 2002. Duke said he had read every single word that Pierce had ever written. Who else is attracted to the quiet? Who else wants to go here? This is a man named Wolf Zendik and his partner Errol Wolf Zendik. They were the leaders and founders of a commune / sex cult / hippie commune called the Zendik Arts Farm, which ended up there in the quiet zone as well, about 10 miles south of the Greenbank Observatory. Why? Because they wanted to get away from it all. Because it was a cheap land, not many people, that could have a huge acreage, and they could pursue their quirky ideas. They wanted to get away from the quote unquote consumerist death culture that Wolf Zendik believed was, killing the rest of America and devouring the rest of the world. Where could they get away from it all? The quiet zone. This is a woman named Helen Zuma. I spoke with her for the book, and she's a character who's in the book. She's somebody who was a member of the Zendik cult for about a decade and was able to escape it. Who else is attracted to the quiet zone? This is a woman named Diane Scow. She believes that she has an illness called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, EHS. She believes that she is made physically ill by Wi-Fi, by cell signals, by all the electronic noise that's all around us in the modern world. And she believes that the only place that she can get away from it all, that she can find refuge from that noise, is the quiet zone. It's her last refuge, and what we have is a noisy world today. And she's the first. She went there in 2007. She lives there to this day. I saw her husband when I was back in the quiet zone in Greenbank in September, just 2 months ago. She still lives there, along with hundreds of other electrosensitives who have moved to the quiet zone from around the United States and around the world over the past decade.
How did she know, Steve, where it was?
So according to Diane, she would been living in Idaho, and she started feeling pain, and she pinpointed it. She started feeling pain in her head like an ice pick going through her head, or the feeling of having an ice cream headache is how she described it, but she hadn't eaten the ice cream, so what could it be? And so she pinpointed it to the cell phone tower that had just been erected near her family's farm. So she started driving around the country looking for a place where she would feel better. And she went to Nicaragua, she went to Sweden, she said. But on one of those drive arounds, I think she was in the Smokies, and she was parked her Winnebago somewhere, and the ranger said, well, you can't stay here, but I do know of another place where you might feel better, and said there's this place called the Quiet Zone. And so she drove to Greenbank, and she felt better, and I think within months she had bought a house there. She's lived there ever since. Another electrosensitive who's since moved there is this woman. Her name is Sue Howard. She's another character in the book. She still lives there to this day. That's her husband. He also lives there now. And she's from Westchester, New York, not too far away from there. So it was this real sense of people even, from my sphere of life are moving out there to the quiet zone. It's not just me, going out there in search of quiet. It's people from Westchester, people with electrosensitivity. So the quiet zone, all these people are going in search of quiet. How quiet is it really? Right? As a journalist, as Steve Fagan taught me when I was a young lad, like you really have to ask the question, like, to just take it on face value, it's quiet. Is it really that quiet? Do people really not have Wi-Fi? Are they really happy to be living this way? Actually, sorry, I was skipping ahead on my slide. I will get to that question. The quiet zone, but what is it all for, really? Is it really all just for the sake of the Greenbank Observatory? This was a question I didn't even think to ask. This is a question that I kind of stumbled into when I was kind of just like walking around the observatory and started talking with people. I showed you that map of the National Radio Quiet Zone, and you can see where the Greenbank telescope is. If you look at it, it's not really in the center of the map, is it? Right? It's kind of off kilter. And even on this map here, you can see like this is the map they sell at the observatory's cafe shop. You can see like where the Greenbank telescope is. It's where the star is. It's not in the center. So if you have this quiet zone, it's supposed to be protecting this thing. Why isn't the thing at the center? Wouldn't that make the most sense for protecting it?
Yeah.
So here's another map that you can find. It has two stars on it. One star is at Greenbank. The other is at Sugar Grove, West Virginia, where to this day, the National Security Agency, which is the spy arm of the US Defense Department, operates its own collection of about a half dozen highly secretive telescopes that are swooping up all the phone calls and emails and messages that we're all sending in the rest of this noisy world. It's been called the country's largest eavesdropping bug. And it's there because it's a quiet zone, because you have to have a quiet place if you want to be able to listen to all the noise, all around us on the East Coast. But they don't really talk about it that much, because, well, it's a pretty secretive thing. And the NSA, the US military, would rather be hiding behind the Greenbank Observatory in a sense.
Do they cooperate, two of them together? They work together?
They do, yeah. So the Greenbank, so it's telling that, so it's called the National Radio Quiet Zone, and there's a National Radio Quiet Zone administrator. She's based in Greenbank. Any kind of installations that you want to install there, they go to the Greenbank Observatory, which again lends to this arm of we're getting approval from the Greenbank Observatory. But then she, on behalf of Sugar Grove, monitors those things. And she, on their behalf, will forward them some information. She's also determining, based on a spectrum analysis and geography and strength and height of all these installations that are going to happen, whether or not it'll impact the Greenbank telescope, but also Sugar Grove. That's for civilian installations in the quiet zone. For military or for classified installations, if you want to have an Air Force, communication system somewhere in there, that goes directly to Sugar Grove, and they handle those processes in the National Radio Quiet Zone. So yeah, they're very much aware of each other, and Sugar Grove will kick money, will kick funds to Greenbank to monitor the quiet zone on their behalf. But it's very much to Sugar Grove's benefit that Greenbank is the public face of the quiet zone. That way people aren't as excited about following the rules of quiet if they know it's for the sake of spying on them, for this somewhat nefarious activity. If it's for the sake of science and discovering what's out there in the world, yeah, we can get along with that. This is what Sugar Grove looks like. I showed you the map earlier of the Greenbank Observatory. Sugar Grove has a pretty large facility as well. You can see these two large circular areas. So back when it was first established, they had these things called woolen weavers. They were built in the 60s. It's essentially these metal poles sticking out of the ground in a circular area. This one's got rid of those, and they have actual telescopes, about a half dozen. The largest, which is I think 150 feet in diameter. It's about half the size of the Greenbank telescope. So, as I was saying before, is the quiet zone as quiet as the media suggests? And being a good journalist, I had to ask, is there really no Wi-Fi? Are people really happy not to have cell service, not to have smartphones? Are smartphones actually banned? Because it's all this stuff actually not there? To find out the answer, went for a drive around with the quiet zone's top cop, Chuck Nide. This is Chuck Nide. He's this really great guy. Mild-mannered, kind of bear-like. He's got a bushy beard. He's always wearing jeans. He sings in the local church choir. He also operates he helps out with the local radio station, and his wife is a manager there. does like a weekly jazz radio show, and they have 7 steady listeners. So he drives around town in this truck known as the Electromagnetic Interference Tracking Truck. It's the acronym EMIT. He gets inside of EMIT, and EMIT, it's like this Dodge Ram. It's like a tricked out Dodge Ram with all these antennas sticking out the top. And they act as like a direction finding array. So you can like be driving around town, those antennas will pick up a signal and then be able to point at it and like locate exactly which house has it and tell him like the strength of the signal, what the name of the signal is. So I get in the cab with Chuck. And he's got all these computer monitors and stuff, which are, telling him what's going on in the radio atmosphere there. And before we even get out of the parking lot, we've picked up like a half dozen signals. Within like several miles of the observatory, we picked up something like 100 Wi-Fi signals. It's hardly banned. It's hardly restricted. It's everywhere. Everybody had it. Like to the point where like it was hard to find anybody who didn't have Wi-Fi there. I mean, like all of those media headlines about how Wi-Fi is not there, about how it's illegal, how it's banned, they were not true. And there's a lot more happening there than like this, quaint portrayal of just being a quiet place. Yeah, all these media portrayals, that I showed you before, basically not getting at the truth of how noisy this place really is. A fun example, this is actually something I learned when I was just back in Greenbank. So I mentioned in the book how directly across the street from the observatory, there was a house with Wi-Fi. Like you cross the road and there it is. And their router name was Screw You NRAO. NRAO stands for National Radio Astronomy Observatory. That's how little that house cared for what was going on at the observatory. I didn't know it at the time, but that was actually the deputy sheriff's house. And he was known to walk across the street with his smartphone into the observatory's cafe, and people could see him looking at messages on his cafe with the Wi-Fi that was coming from across the street of his house. That's how strong that Wi-Fi was and how much it was polluting that radio light that they needed. And that has real consequences for radio astronomy, because it means that, no longer can they essentially look in that radio band into the radio universe. You can't pick up measurements any longer there in that 2.4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz frequency. And a former quiet zone cop, as he put it to me, if ET calls, at 2.4 gigahertz, we're not going to hear it. We're not going to get that signal. So if the quiet zone isn't so quiet, what's the damn book about? Is it a book about nothing? Like Seinfeld? Well, it's a book about, the search for quiet. It's a picture of Jesus, who went into the wilderness for 40 days seeking quiet. There's a picture of Buddha who meditated under a Bodhi tree, for something like 40 days as well, seeking quiet. And there's a picture of Jay Lockman who goes to Greenbank because he needs that quiet to unlock the mysteries of the universe. It's a book, and Diane Scow, who leads that band of electrosensitives who are seeking a piece of quiet. It's a book about facades and about how what's on the surface, that's the Greenbank Observatory, can be a cover for what is reality. And that's a picture of Sugar Grove and the spy facility there. That Greenbank is the cover for in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's a book about, who was attracted to quiet, from neo-Nazis, that's David Pringle, to, shady con doctors, to sex cults. It's a book about how even in Greenbank, you're not going to get away from the noise. That even Greenbank is struggling with how to have a healthy relationship with Wi-Fi, with smartphones, with all this gadgetry that's all around us. And how, Greenbank isn't the savior. It's not this Garden of Eden. It's not this, Shangri-La that media makes it out to be. You can't go to Greenbank expecting it to solve all our problems, be it from, Facebook or Instagram or wherever else. This isn't the place that's going to solve our problems for you. And it really puts the onus back on all of us. That's what I tried to do with the book. It puts the onus back on all of us to have a more healthy relationship with our devices. Be that, my 2-year-old Manny, dealing with his mother's cell phone, or for all of us, trying to have a more healthy relationship with our devices. Greenbank is not the answer.
Did that lady feel better there?
Trying to be, yeah.
That's weird, huh?
Yeah.
They're still all around.
There's,
Or is it more the cell towers?
there's still no cell service in Greenbank, and there is a lot of Wi-Fi there, But like I said, it's still sparsely populated, and so depending on where you're coming from, it still is going to be a lot more radio quiet there than where you're coming from. It's just not radio silent. It's not as quiet as you may expect it to be. There have been a lot of people who have gone there expecting one thing, from what they read in the whatever newspapers or whatever, and found like a much more noisy reality and been really frustrated and angry about that. And I felt the brunt of some of that. Like some people, like those are sensitives, they pointed their finger at me and said, media lies. You lied to us about how like this place isn't as quiet as it really is. And I'm like, it's not me. I'm sorry, I didn't lie to you. I fell for it too. I thought this place would be super quiet. So that's all I got for that presentation. Maybe we can go into a Q&A now if anybody has any questions. You don't need to clap.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks. Me and Manny, when we were back at the Greenbank Observatory in September. It's a really awesome place. I would encourage everybody to go there. It's beautiful. Like it's really, like I said, it's just fascinating to round this bend. Also, you see these amazing telescopes, looming over the forest canopy. Yeah, it's a beautiful landscape as well. A lot of interesting, kooky characters up there. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What point did you realize that it was sort of a hoax or had you already committed to the book and you had one notion and you have to change gears? So maybe describe that process and when you came to the realization.
I from the beginning, so that drive around with Chuck Niday, that was actually pretty quickly into my research. First went there in March of 2017, and then the drive around was in like June of 2017. And then I kept on working on the book for a number of years afterward. So I knew from the beginning that it wasn't as quiet as like all these articles were making it out to be. And really from there on, I was just like crossing my fingers and hoping that nobody else would write that story that I was planning to write. Because like when you're writing a book, it's like you have years of lag time. It just takes like, a daily journalist going in there and writing the story and saying it's not as quiet as it's going to be. I always was more fascinated with the culture of the Quiet Zone and all the kooky characters who have been drawn there, like the neo-Nazis, the Patch Adams, the sex cult, and the electrosensitives. Like to me, it's like that's like the rich stuff that was there. And it was more, I felt pressure, from my agent, my literary agent, to go more in the direction of, what lessons can we take away from Greenbank, from the Quiet Zone? That's more of like the easy book they can write. There was a book actually. There's a book for comparison called Norwich, Vermont. Maybe some of you saw that. Norwich, Vermont is this home of like, I don't know, it's like dozens of world-class Olympic athletes. It's like, what's the secret to Norwich, Vermont? That book kind of took that angle of like, here are the lessons you can take out of this town and bring it to your own life. It's a very positive story. Whereas like right from the beginning, I was kind of drawn more to the darker side of quiet there. How the quiet attracts like has a darker influence on the surrounding county. And how that quiet has like a yin and a yang quality to it, with like the astronomy there and that awesome aspect to it, and then the darker side of what people want from quiet.
When you pitched the story, did you had one you presented one idea, one concept, and then at what point did you have to go back and explain to your agent and the publisher and the editor and so forth that things have changed?
It was pretty well fleshed out by the time I went to a publisher. So I never had to say to the publisher, everything's changed. Now there's neo-Nazis there. We gotta include that in the book. Like they knew that was coming into it. But there was an aspect of how do all these things fit together in a book, Steve? I remember like my editor at the publishing house saying that to me. And there was some back and forth about whether or not the character of Patch Adams would stay in the book, because for them it was, or for my editor, she was kind of like, I'm not even, when I talk to the publisher, if my bosses about what the book is about, I leave out Patch Adams because that's just like so far out of left field. Why is Patch Adams there, and how does that fit to the story of the astronomy in the observatory? So that chapter took a lot of work on my part, with like really, connecting him to the other characters and making it much more solid. Of like, here's all the stuff that we should really know about Patch Adams, the character. Here's the real Patch Adams that I want to get out there. So that one took a lot more convincing. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Stevie?
Yeah.
How protective are they of their quiet zone? like so many people are breaching.
Yeah.
Even those people who live there. So are there those, and apart from the electrosensitives, like the radio quiet zone, how vigilant are they to protect their quiet? Or
Yeah.
have they kind of thrown it out the window?
So I think you mean like how vigilant is the observatory about protecting the quiet that they have, that they need to have for the sake of like the science that you're doing? And that's like a tough question because the observatory is cash strapped. It was nearly shut down in the past decade by the National Science Foundation. National Science Foundation actually said, we're putting it up for review. And one of 5 options is mothballing the facility. Another option is like, turning to a museum. Another is selling it. Like only one of those 5 options was like continuing full funding for it. So they don't have the money to like hire lawyers and go around town and start suing people and saying you can't have whatever gadgets you think you want to have because like we have the law on our side. It's not really clear if the observatory would have the law on its side for cracking down on smartphones or Wi-Fi within that quiet zone. And that's because the state law that creates a sacred 10-mile radius was established in 1956. Do we even have color TV in 1956? I don't know. There was certainly no internet. There was no Wi-Fi. There were no smartphones. There was none of this like modern stuff. Was there color TV?
No,
I don't know. We grew up with black and white.
I don't think so.
Oh, I don't.
We didn't have it.
So there's no color TV, much less an iPhone.
No, it was.
Yeah. Point being, like the quiet zone laws back when they were passed in 1956, they were meant to protect against like a incidental radiation from a malfunctioning radio or a parking electric fence or a misfunctioning dog blanket. And in reality, the quiet zone cop did actually find that dog blanket at somebody's house and he fixed the blanket and gave it back to them. It didn't specify intentional transmitters like Wi-Fi and smartphones. And there's a legal debate within the observatory over whether or not they could actually crack down on that stuff, if the law would allow them to crack down on it. So they're really dependent a lot on voluntary cooperation from the community to get that quiet, at least in the very heart of the quiet zone. They do still have the national radio quiet zone, and they do still have that quiet zone administrator who has a yay or nay vote on any kind of fixed installation in that entire 13,000 square mile area. That's a federal statute. That's a pretty amazing thing. It was really like an incredible thing of foresight that Congress passed that back in 1958, thinking like, we didn't have any of this stuff back in 58, and Congress can't agree on anything today, and yet they agree that we should have this national radio quiet zone then. But like you can imagine, there's so many cell antennas coming in. When the 5G now, there's a whole more installations because of that. But there's still only one quiet zone administrator handling all that paperwork. It's an increasing amount of workload on her to be monitoring the entire quiet zone. So I mean, there's an argument to be made if they really cared about it, they would invest more money in that quiet. They would do more drive arounds. They would have Chuck Knight actually going to people's houses and saying, hey, you're not supposed to have that Wi-Fi. Instead, Chuck Knight, the quiet zone cop, he's one of those people who has Wi-Fi at their house. They've really given up on quite a bit of it. Yeah. Chris, you had your neighbors.
Yes, obviously you spent a lot of time there. And so I guess my question is sort of 2 parts. And one is, how did the people react to you? Did you get to a point where they forgot you were there, which is of course like nirvana for a journalist, right?
Yeah.
And then how did you, do they have things like old-fashioned payphones on the corners? Do they have those sorts of things that we had back in the 70s?
Yeah.
Because there isn't that much cell service. And how did you call home?
So I don't have a phone, so I don't call home anyways. I email, and they do have internet there. So like that's kind of like a misconception too. There's actually a New York Times headline that said land where the internet ends. There's this profile of Greenbank as if there's no internet there, as if they don't have connectivity to the online world. Some of the fastest internet in all of Appalachia is at the Greenbank Observatory. They have a dedicated fiber optic line that goes to Morgantown. There are some payphones there around Pocahontas County, and that's partly a holdover because there's not much cell service there still. There is worse service coming to the area, but yeah, there are some of those payphones. Most people do have landlines at their houses. I would say they all have landlines at their houses because they know they're not going to have cell phones. You guys don't have a landline at your house.
We had one 3 years ago.
So my parents don't have a landline. We don't have a landline in our house. I'd say most people are giving up. You don't have a landline anymore.
My mother said that.
So most people are, oh, yeah, you're right. They're all giving up their landlines, but they still have to have them there in Greenbank. And that's an example of how, not to make everything about me, but to make it about me. Like, I don't have a cell phone, and increasingly, I feel like I'm being shut out of like areas of the economy, one after another. Like to get on, I was at a Chinese restaurant one time. I was at the door. I wanted to order takeout. The guy's like, you have to call it in. I said, I don't have a cell phone. He's like, well, I'm not going to serve you that.
Oh.
I couldn't get takeout at a Chinese restaurant because I didn't have a cell phone. To get like to sign into your social security account. There's been threats that you have to have like a password that's texted to you to your cell phone. So you don't have a cell phone. How are you gonna get online?
Yeah.
So that's like affecting my life in a real way. You can imagine for those people in Greenbank in the quiet zone who are not supposed to have devices. Like, how is this culture affecting them? And if that culture is pressuring them to have devices, what does that mean for trying to do astronomy there in Greenbank any longer? The other question you had was, did I ever get to a feeling? Did I forget that I was there? Probably not. Like, if you're an outsider, you really stick out a lot there. I did feel like at the observatory, I don't know if they just didn't care or if I blended in, but like I would just like roam up and down the hallways. I had this really cool feeling of being like, knock on Jay Lockman's door, be like, hey Jay, what's going on today? Or I'd go down in the basement and talk to the quiet zone administrator, Paulette Woody, and like we'd talk for a couple of hours. So I did have this feeling of like having snuck into the observatory, was able to just like wander up and down the hallways and talk to people there. I don't know if they would still allow that anymore. Certainly not with COVID. Do they allow that to happen? So I was there like at a unique time at the observatory and pre-COVID for that to happen. Yeah, I mean, people often ask, I did keep on going back enough that the two questions people there would ask me were, one, why are you back? Didn't you learn enough already? And the second question was, is your book out yet? Like so much time had passed, I think they started to doubt whether or not like I was a journalist or working or whatever. Like that was often the question too, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You can't just like be like researching this and writing a book. Like, what do you actually do?
Were they upset that you were writing about them?
Some people were. Yeah. One of the characters in the book is a woman named Jane L. Graham. And she's the editor of the Pocahontas Times. That's the one newspaper there in the county. And there's a real sense that I got from her and from other people of this is our county and this is our story. And who are you as an outsider to come in here and write about our story? You don't know us. You don't know what we're about here. And that's a fair thing to say. And I think journalists would also say, well, that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm talking to you. And I think there's a real story here that I'm digging into and finding that hasn't been told yet. Like I have a right to tell this story. But that was a back and forth and a source of tension with a number of characters there.
I would sense that they'd be upset that you're writing the truth.
It depended on who it was. Some people were happy about me digging into the more nefarious history. Other people would rather just totally forget about the neo-Nazi presence that has been there for quite a long time. Other people were really happy to see me, portraying this county for all it was, warts and all, including the fact that there's a lot more cell phones and smartphones and Wi-Fi and cell service that's popularly portrayed. We have time for one more question.
One more question. So I'm just wondering, sort of the big cultural, more cultural context question. Doing your research, did you come across any, experts or psychologists or whatnot who talked about, with any authority about sort of how to make a better relationship with your devices, how to, I mean, in some ways sometimes it seems like, it's the tail wagging the dog, right?
For sure.
Like, and we're not very thoughtful about it, as much as we might try. And I just wondered if you've heard any sort of, voices of reason that kind of,
Yeah, absolutely.
out.
There's quite a few. Sherry Turkle is a MIT professor, and she's like really at the forefront of this. She's written a couple of books on it. She's really she was really at the forefront of like warning about like what these devices are doing to our brains. Cal Newport is another person who comes to mind. He wrote a book called Digital Minimalism. I think another one called A World Without Email. That was his more recent book. And he's all about like giving tips for how to have a more, sustainable and healthy relationship with our devices. Ear Niall, he's another, kind of guru on this for how to like have a healthier relationship with our devices. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I mentioned Cal Newport and Sherry Turkle and some of the others.
One more really quick question.
Yeah.
So my sister lives in West Virginia, and I've been there many times.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've been to the Purple Fiddle.
No.
You haven't been to the Purple Fiddle, but you have to go back to West Virginia.
Happily.
Thomas, West Virginia. It's
Okay.
Great place for your bluegrass and,
Okay.
yeah.
Great, will do.
Yeah.
How
it's
close
like-
is it to Seneca Rocks?
It's closer to Blackwater Falls.
Okay, yeah. It's
Yeah.
not too far away, maybe now, 2 hours
Yeah,
or so.
and it's a town that sits, there's literally a coal mine underneath the town.
Oh, awesome. Good, good.
It's a famous town.
If I can add, so Dave mentioned Seneca Rocks. I've got a sticker on my water bottle here for Seneca Rocks. It's this awesome rock climbing area in pink there, really in the quiet zone. It's the only peak on the East Coast that you can only get the top of by technical rock climbing. There's no hiking trails to the top. And Jen and I had some like fun experiences rock climbing there early in our relationship, which is why the little boy who she's holding is named Seneca. He's named after Seneca, West Virginia. Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. I think we're out of time. Thanks everybody for coming.